Hello everyone and welcome to the video. Today I want to look at video games that had an incredibly bad launch window. And this is games that maybe have done really well and bettered themselves and are doing successful today, or games that, let's just say, didn't. And there was something in the news I read this week, which I'll explain later on in the video what it was, that just made me really angry about this, because I think this is becoming a particularly bad problem within the gaming industry, that this is happening repeatedly, and it never really used to, but it does these days. So I want to look at those video games that just didn't do well when they first came out, for many different reasons, as you'll see. But for now, I want to jump straight into it. So this is going to be a list of what I believe is some of the worst launches I've seen in video gaming. And this is in no particular order other than the last one. The last one I do genuinely think was one of the worst, and I want to talk about at length. So stick around for that. That's the one that made me, I saw the news about it and it made me want to make this video because it made me so angry. So I'll mention that at the end because it'll give me more time. But the rest of them are in no particular order. So jumping straight in with the first one I think was really bad, which was, of course, No Man's Sky. Oh, I was all in on this game, on the hype train. I love space, I love everything to do with space. I have several sort of Kerbal Space Program tutorial videos on my channel. And yeah, I was all in. I got this game on release day and my god was I disappointed. One of the things I was majorly disappointed about was they advertised this as a multiplayer game, and only maybe, I think it was 2 or 3 days beforehand, did the lead developer announce that it actually wasn't multiplayer in the way most people think about multiplayer, i.e. you couldn't actually play with other people, there was no way to find other people. So me and my friend bought this game together, and we discovered that as we were playing, because of course we don't follow every developer's Twitter handle. And we all know the problem that this game had: missing content, broken promises. I'm specifically using here in the footage you're seeing the original gameplay trailer for this video. Now this video was actually, it turned out it was scripted. This is not anyone playing through actual gameplay, this is entirely scripted. And whilst the game today kind of looks like this and you can do most of this, at launch you could do almost none of the content you're seeing on screen. It took them years, and eventually it did, but I'll talk about that in a minute, but you couldn't do any of this at launch. Other problems with this game, of course, were just really boring content. It mostly just involved you going to a planet, mining some resources, maybe finding some small animals, getting in your spaceship, going to another planet, flying to a different solar system. It just wasn't what Hello Games promised that it would be. And this was so bad that Sony took the unprecedented move of actually giving refunds to basically anyone who asked for it. Now, these days, in fairness, No Man's Sky is actually one of the greatest success stories of gaming. It is a fantastic game now. I've locked in over 200 hours on it. It is genuinely an incredible space simulator these days. But it is such a shame that it took, I think it came out in 2016, it has taken 5 years to get there. And I just think at the time, when even days before release they were advertising aspects of the game that just didn't exist, and like, they knew it didn't exist, they knew these things weren't in the game, and yet they still promoted them. And I just don't understand that. I really don't. It was a really rough time, and in fairness, I didn't come back to this game for many years because of that. My friend that I mentioned that I bought the game with actually did get his refund on it, and it was just incredibly disappointing. But, as I say, it is a fantastic game now. I actually mentioned this in my favourite top 5 open world games, which I'll put a little banner in the corner if you want to go watch that. I do mention it there, because I do think it is great these days. It's just a shame the way it started, isn't it? So, we'll move on from there, though, to, next up, Fallout 76. Now, this game I was very much excited by. I love Fallout. I have Vault Boy tattooed on my arm. I was quite excited about this game, but I have been burnt quite a few times before, like with No Man's Sky. So I decided to wait, and yeah, as it turned out, I'm glad I did. So this was, for anyone out of the know, an MMO, effectively, in the Fallout universe. And the really bad thing about it was, when it first came out, of course, was that there was absolutely no NPCs at all in it. And most of the major complaints was that There's kind of a pattern going to form here, guys. Lack of content, boring endgame stuff. There was just nothing to do once you hit the endgame. And even before that, because there were no NPCs, the world just felt very empty and emotionless. It didn't feel lived in, which is actually, in fairness, a crucial part for world building in video games. So there was a very boring gameplay loop, and this unfortunately combines what happened with No Man's Sky with a lack of content, and actually as well with effectively a pay-to-play style when they released the subscription model, which I will talk about in a moment. But effectively all you need to know about this game is that it was boring. It was dead on arrival, and nobody really wanted to play it. But in fairness, much like No Man's Sky, Bethesda did actually add a ton of content to the game, and it was no longer the broken meme that it was at release. So there were enough players there that I think Bethesda thought they could monetize this, that they were hardcore enough group that they would actually pay to get the extra content. But unfortunately, that also went badly. So let's discuss that, shall we? Okay, it was a subscription service called Fallout First, and it was quite expensive, I believe about $13 per month. And it added a ton of new features to the game, in fairness, behind a locked paywall though. So for that, you got a few different things, such as unlimited storage, and a number of sort of atoms, which was something you could use in the online shop that they had. So, you know, like COD points, that sort of thing. And one of the big things was private servers. Unfortunately, it eventually came out that these private servers that were exclusively for you and your friends weren't exactly private, and anyone could actually join them. So it became increasingly unclear exactly what you were supposed to be paying for, other than a few little bits of loot and storage. So this honestly just struck, I think, a bad chord with everyone. It was already a game that was losing players, it had very little content, and when they were trying to introduce something that everyone had been asking for from the beginning, a private world for you and your friends to play together, they locked it behind a paywall, and it just didn't feel great to people. Now, in fairness, this game has kind of done what No Man's Sky did, and it's actually not what it used to be. What it came out was a shell of what it is today, and it is apparently quite good. However, the whole Fallout First subscription thing was just a joke. I'll leave it at that, though, and we'll move on to our next round of criticism. So I think everyone probably saw this one coming, but let's have a quick chat about Star Wars Battlefront 2, shall we? The game that quite literally ended loot boxes, which in my mind is one of the worst mechanics that has ever entered modern gaming. It's gambling under any other word. That's all it is. It's just gambling. And I'll admit, in a lot of games like Destiny and whatnot with the engrams, I got caught in that. Rocket League also was my poison. I quite often went in on Rocket League's loot boxes. But yeah, I think we need to discuss this. So unlike the last two I've just talked about, this one had content. It had all the content, it had all the special players you wanted to play as, you know, Vader, Yoda, whatnot. However, it was all, like Fallout, entirely locked behind paywalls. Effectively, you could grind for it, but you'd have to grind, I think it was somebody worked out it was about 20 hours just to unlock Vader. Then it would be another 20 hours to unlock one of his abilities, and in total it would need like 100 hours just for one character, which effectively made it pay to play. And, you know, because these characters had massive bonuses over the standard units you were using, it was kind of pay to win as well. If somebody was willing, rich enough, dumb enough, whatever, to drop thousands of dollars on loot boxes, then they would get it. And this then sparked everyone around the world. The EU, the US government all looked at loot boxes, and they eventually ended up banning them in video games. And as we all know now, season passes have taken over from loot boxes. But this is how bad this was. I mean, this was EA at its EA-iest, if that makes sense to anyone. They always pull stuff like this. And I think this was just greed. This was pure greed. But they've already paid 50 quid, $70 for a brand new game. How much more money can we squeeze out of people? And it was too much. And the gaming world, and then the world in general, reacted pretty badly to that. Now, I think when you've got world governments and presidents of countries talking about your game in a negative light, you know you done screwed up. Like, that's bad. And eventually, in fairness to them, much like No Man's Sky and Fallout 76, here's the pattern again, they fixed it, and these days I do believe it is an actually very good game. And I say believe because I've never played it myself, but I believe these days it's an extremely good game and very fulfilling as well, with lots of content. It's just that once again it had this start. Now, unlike the other ones that I've talked about on this list, this had the content from the beginning. It was just locked. So yeah, but once again though, it's apparently quite a good game now. But not all of them that have great launches end up becoming great games, do they? So let's verge into that territory now. I think that's best. And of course, next up we have Anthem. Again, I think most people probably saw this one coming. The expectations were so colossally high on this game. And the one thing I will give it, it looks very pretty. And I think that's what got a lot of people hyped. The game world looked really interesting, and the idea that you're in this exo power suit and you could just fly around anywhere you want, and it looked very interesting. It looked like what they wanted it to be, what BioWare wanted it to be, which was a Destiny killer. That's what they were after. Now, again, this was EA publishing this game, and again, EA have a habit of doing this, but by the sounds of it, the game had an incredibly troubled production, which is heavily noted, and there were certainly issues with the way they tried to sell the game, as I say, a Destiny-style killer, a looter-shooter sort of game, but when it was released, it was just, again, so disappointing. There was nothing to do. Once again, like the other games on this list, there was no content at the high end. There was content, there were quests to do and whatnot, but the hub area where you were, all the NPCs were really boring and dull and had no personality. And then once you reached the end game, there was just nothing there. There was nothing for you to do, and all of the missions were just go here, shoot this, go back, repeat. And I think for a lot of people, the really downside of the sort of really disappointing thing of this was that this was from BioWare. You know, the creators of Mass Effect, and I mean, some of the most critically acclaimed games of all time have come from BioWare, so hopes were super high for this, and it was just so disappointing. I was going to get this one myself, but I wanted to wait. Again, I've been burnt, and I'm so glad I did. But, and here's the pattern again, they said they were going to update it. Now, I just want to have a little interlude here. I really don't like this current trend of release a broken game and or a game that is just missing a ton of content just to meet a deadline, and then you can push it out the door later and update it via patch. You know, it never used to happen because you couldn't do it on the old consoles. You know, there's no internet connection on N64s. But I just feel that these days there are so many games, virtually every game on this list other than Star Wars Battlefront can be said to have done this. And then, oh, but it's okay now, and it's just that same pattern over and over again. Broken and or missing content, and we'll update it later, just get it out the door. And I just think it is a massive disservice to the consumer. I just don't think it's fair. I think a lot of it's false advertising, frankly. And then it's also a huge disservice, though, to the developers, who then have continued crunch time. They faced developer crunch working 12, 14-hour days just to meet the deadline, and now they have to do the same thing to do the update. But speaking of which, we'll go back to Anthem, shall we? So EA and BioWare said that there were going to be a number of large updates that would update this game and completely revolutionise it. They even started referring to it as Anthem 2.0. I think they were trying to do a Final Fantasy XIV style thing when that got rebranded after its own disastrous launch, which could be comparable to all of the ones I've mentioned. They all fit into some sort of category similar to what I've talked about. Anyway, due to incredibly poor sales, and I think people just getting increasingly frustrated with this release broken, update later model, no one bought into it, no one had any faith in it, and they ended up cancelling it. So Anthem isn't like No Man's Sky. It isn't like the other ones we've listed here where, oh, it's a good game now. It's done. There's no more updates. They've cancelled it all. So I just feel sorry for everyone who bought the game. I know they were issued with refunds a lot of the time as well, but I just feel at this point you're cheating people, and you know, to promise such a thing, because some people really did love this game, or they at least had high hopes for what it could become. To just then cancel it out of the blue, yeah. So that's why this one's further down the list, I think. I know I said they weren't in any particular order, but I think this one's second worst for me, just because they're not doing anything to fix it. They've cancelled it. So We'll move on now to the last one I wanted to talk about and the whole reason why I made this video. Oh, cool. Of course, it's going to be Cyberpunk 2077, isn't it? It has to be. I mean, I think this was potentially the most hyped game of the decade. I also think it had the worst game launch of all time. I mean, it was just insane, wasn't it? I don't think anyone was prepared for what actually happened. So, if you were somehow out of the loop on this, let's go through it. CD Projekt Red, the makers of things like The Witcher 3, widely considered one of the best games of all time, certainly one of the best RPGs of all time. Very high hopes for this game, a cyberpunk-themed RPG in Night City. And yeah, in case you were living under a Dwayne Johnson all this time, it did not go well. So, I mean, where do we start on this? So on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox, it just didn't work for the most part. It was so incredibly buggy and so graphically demanding that it just trashed. It literally bricked people's systems. It turned them off. It just would not play at all. And when it did, the bugs were game-breaking to the point you could literally not play the game. It clearly wasn't capable of running. It was too far ahead. It was clearly designed for the more advanced consoles. But even on the PS5 and the new Xbox, it still had bugs everywhere. And the only people that seemed to get away with it was high-end PC users. And I think particularly the reason this was so bad was because it came from CD Projekt Red, who were one of the few remaining golden geese of gaming. Everyone looked to them to say, that's how you make video games, that's how you run a business, that's how you do it. And then they give us this. So Sony pulled it from their PlayStation Store. Microsoft added a disclaimer about the issues you may face. And, I mean, CD Projekt Red themselves announced they would offer refunds for this, but did not consult people like Valve for their Steam refund, which forced their hand, and Steam did end up offering these refunds. Now let's get on to the reason why I made this video, shall we? 6 months after the release of the game, as of filming this video, and they have just announced that this game is stable. I actually tweeted about this the other day because it just annoyed me so badly, and I saw a tweet about this as well, and this is why it annoyed me so bad. Stable. 6 months later, and they say it is a satisfactory stability. So in other words, it's taken you 6 months just to get your game to a point where it works. I mean, I'm sorry, maybe I'm a bit old school, but I think a game should work when it comes out. So yeah, I think what CD Projekt Red have done here is so far beyond unacceptable that I genuinely don't know how to describe it. It's not just unacceptable, it is beyond that, and I think the way they've treated their customers, and particularly because it came from them, because they were the makers of The Witcher and whatnot, it just hurts so much deeper. And I think, you know, they may announce a new game sometime soon, The Witcher 4 maybe, or whatever they make. I think it's going to be a long time before anyone trusts this company again, before anyone places their faith in their ability to create a game that will actually deliver on what they're promising. So that's that, though. What I believe to be the worst video game launches in at least certainly recent memory. And I think, as you can see, they are all recent. And this never used to be a problem, and it makes me so angry. So angry the way I feel gamers are getting treated these days with this. And I just don't think it's acceptable. And I think, honestly, video game companies and publishers, I don't think it's necessarily the developers' fault, but the publishers like EA, Activision, Ubisoft really need to get their act together regarding this, because it is just not acceptable. And these are the worst ones that prove that this is certainly becoming a problem, I think, for modern gaming. But I will leave that there. Thank you for watching if you've got this far through the video. I very much appreciate you listening to my rants. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you want to give me a subscribe, that would be fantastic. I would genuinely appreciate that. But even if you don't, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Stay safe.